How many of you like to be first at something? Anybody like to be first? Try something new? I asked the first service that, and nobody rose their hand. I don't think they trusted where I was about to go with that, so they just kept their hands down. We're trying something new this morning, something we've not done before during our services. As you know, Marvin loves being here with you and being away, especially being away a couple times in the last 3 or 4 weeks. It's just not how he likes to spend his Sunday mornings. So we're trying something new. In just a moment, you're going to see on the screens video that Jack Carpenter and I filmed on Friday afternoon. It's about 10 minutes. It's of Marvin. And Marvin is sharing with you a brief version of the sermon that is in here. So I encourage you to take your bulletin and you can follow along with notes. And then he's going to talk a little bit about our visioning process. And after that's over, I'm going to come back up and hopefully wrap things up. And we'll go from there. So pay attention to the screens.
I've discovered that God has an unusual sense of humor. This week I was planning to talk to you about interruptions in life, when things just don't go like you plan. Unfortunately, that's what's happened to me. Is I had a little minor procedure this week that keeps me away from being with you. I'm doing fine. I'm grateful for Danny and Jack Carpenter who videoed this, and for Danny and all the work he's picking up while I'm out a few days. So I want to talk to you about bucket list. You may remember a movie with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson a few years ago when they each had bucket lists they wanted to accomplish by the time their time on earth had finished. And I started thinking about things where I had maybe missed an opportunity to do something, maybe like being with you today. One of those happened when I was very young. I was a seminary student and I'd gone home to Jackson, Tennessee for Easter break. When I got there, my mother told me that I had a wonderful surprise in store for me. Some dear friends in town had a week's pass to the Masters for me. I'd never been to Augusta, and I'd always wanted to go. Unfortunately, the day before I was supposed to go, I was stricken with intestinal flu and ended up watching on CBS. Sometimes that happens to missionary folks like Paul. Paul had a vision, and his vision told him that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. It's in Acts chapter 16, and I'm going to read verses 6 through 10. He and his young colleague Timothy are traveling together, and they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. Paul really liked to go to Asia to preach. He had established relationships there, and he wanted to take Timothy there to introduce him and to let him get to know folks and maybe have a reunion tour. But over in verse 9, it tells us what happened to Paul. And it says, "And a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing beside him and saying, 'Come over to Macedonia and help us.' And when he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel there." So Paul, who wanted to go to Asia with all his might, ends up in Macedonia. You may have heard an old saying, when God closes one door, he opens another. Maybe you found that to be true in your life, but not everybody does. So when a door closes, sometimes we have to adjust. How do we do that? Well, the first thing I want to talk to you about today is that some people respond with disappointment or anger. They just get mad. That wouldn't have been a bad thing for Paul in some eyes. Some people would have thought he deserved to go to Asia, but God had other plans for him. Alexander Graham Bell, I think you've heard of him, a long time ago said something like this: "When one door closes, another opens, but so often we look upon the closed door that we don't see the one that's opened before us." Sometimes we do that as churches. We look back on the good old days and wish it was 1950 or 1960 or 1970 all over again. But if you look at your smartphone watch today, or you look at your calendar, you're going to discover it's 2018 and there's not a thing we can do about it. Some people respond by simply doing nothing. I've done that. Have you? I have a closet full of old ties, some of them 20 years old. I keep waiting on them to come back in style. and I just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. That's what happens to us if we keep waiting on the good old days to come back. One of the most incredible people I've ever read about had a saying that I think is profound for us today. Her name was Helen Keller, and here's what she said: "The most pathetic person in the world is the one who has sight but has no vision." So what's the third option? Well, the third option is we can go forward in God's future in faith. Paul wanted to go to Asia. He wanted to see old friends. But he ended up in Philippi, and he ended up in jail. But then something profound happened, and Paul used that jail experience to lead a jailer and his whole family to know Jesus. He grew to love the people of Philippi, his very favorite church. In fact, he wrote to them these words: "Every time I think of you, I thank my God." I think Paul was happy God changed his plans. Have you ever been happy when God changed your ideas, your plans, your thoughts? It wasn't easy to go to Philippi, to go to Athens, to go to Corinth. It was a strange place where Paul was sometimes looked upon as a buffoon. In Athens, they said he was a babbler, but Paul just kept trudging. So we're talking about dreaming as a church. I want to just leave you two thoughts about dreaming. The first one is this: we need dreams that will challenge us to go beyond our comfort zones. We talked about this last week. For Paul to go to Greece was way beyond his comfort zone. In fact, later he'd go to Rome, and some scholars even think he got to Spain. Paul never worried about his comfort zone. He just kept going. And if our dreams are going to be what they should be, we'll get beyond our comfort zones as well. And the second thought is this: our dreams should only be things that can be accomplished with God's help. You know, Paul had a pretty tough life once he became a Christian. He had a thorn in the flesh. We don't know what it was. He says he prayed 3 times, but that's probably symbolic for he prayed continuously. And he didn't get the answer he wanted. But he got the answer that maybe you've gotten when you faced a thorn in the flesh. What he discovered was that God's grace is sufficient for him. And it is for us as well. So in a few weeks, you're going to be asked, what are your 3 big dreams for our church? I want to give you just a few of mine. The first one is that I hope we grow a stronger discipleship program. I want us to help you and our entire congregation and those who enter this place. I want us to help you know more about the Scripture, about prayer, about God. The second thing I hope we do is I hope we pass our faith on to a new generation. That's going to be pivotal for us as a church, but it's even more important for that new generation to know the love and the grace that you and I experience here. And the third thing, my third big dream, is very simple. It's that we have a passion for what God wants us to do here. Whether that's work in the nursery, or sing in a choir, or referee at Upward, or volunteer at Recovery at Clay Street, or teach Sunday school, or God only knows what we may be doing in the future. That we're going to have a passion that drives us forward. Danny's been so helpful to me the last few weeks, and now he's going to come and talk to you a little bit about some of his dreams. And I hope today you'll begin praying that we will all have God-sized dreams. I'll see you later this week. Thanks so much.
All right. We've been thinking all day yesterday, what if it doesn't work? What do we do? No. So I've been thinking about our visioning and our dreaming process, and I hope you have too. I hope you've been praying about that and thinking about where God is leading us. I think a lot of times that's just God preparing us for what he's going to do. But as I've been thinking about it, one word has kind of just come back to me over and over again. It's been framed in different ways, but it's the word community. Or maybe it's the word fellowship. It's more of a probably biblical word than community. But as I think about community, I think about who is it that God is calling us, specifically First Baptist Church, to be as we go into the next several decades. Who is he calling us to be as a community, for our community that we know of as Kingsport and the Tri-Cities? In the early chapters of Acts, we see a description of that community. Just this short verse in chapter 2, verse 42 of Acts. The writer of Acts says this: "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles." And we could keep on reading. But what we see is that the earliest Christian community met together. They met together as a fellowship. They met together for worship. They met together to pray. They met together on a regular basis because that was important to them. And I want to share just three things briefly with you about where I hope and dream that God is leading our community. I think one of the things that we need to think about as we go forward as a community of believers in Jesus Christ is we need to think about new methods that will help build community. And what I mean is this. Marvin talked about discipleship there. We have had a strong Sunday school program for years, for decades, for 100 years at this church. And we still have a strong Sunday school program. But over the years, what I've noticed is, every once in a while, there will be a Bible study started on a Sunday night here. And maybe it's, quote, on campus, maybe it's off. But I think as we go into the coming years, we need to be open to new ways of doing small groups. We need to be open to new ways or new places for these small groups to be. I think we need to give our blessing to those small groups, and I think we need to learn also what it means to be accountable, from small group leaders to mentors, but to look at new ways that we're going to fit people's schedules. If everybody could be here at 8:40 or 9:45 or 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, and if nobody worked, that would be great. But that's not the culture we live in anymore. For some, their best time to get together with a small group might be on a Tuesday night at somebody's house in their neighborhood. We just need to be open to thinking outside the box about what it means to be together as a church family. The second thing is, I think we need to proactively, not reactively, seek ways to use technology to create opportunities to grow and expand our community. We, along with a lot of churches over time, seem to, and this is not only decades but centuries, churches as a rule seem to react to technology. We're kind of some of the last to get on board, and I think we need to think about not just embrace whatever comes out, because I don't think that's healthy and I don't think that's wise. But I think we need to intentionally think about ways that we can grow our community with technology. How can we share our message? We do simple things like Facebook Live now, but what are ways, even small groups, what are ways our community could be enhanced, could grow, could be healthier through technology? Now, I'm still a firm believer that if you can get a person face-to-face in a small group or in a worship setting such as this, or across the table in a coffee shop, that's much better than texting or streaming or whatever. But sometimes we've got to remember that maybe there are methods out there that can help us. So I think we need to think intentionally about that. I think we need to have people who are doing that. And then the third thing is simply this. In 10 years, I hope and dream that this community of believers will not only grow, but I hope we will grow and we will look different than we do now. As you look out in our community, I look at the friends that our teenagers have. I look at the friends that some of you work with. They don't all look like us. I hope that as we think about different ethnic groups that can be a part of our church community, I hope that as we think about different socioeconomic groups that can be a part of our community, I hope we figure out ways that people not like us can feel comfortable here. I hope that we also look at those groups that are maybe in different life stages and figure out how can they still connect with us as a congregation, as a community. You know, there are a couple, but not too many college students in this room right now. Now, granted, we don't have a large university sitting downtown like some communities do. But is there a way that we can still connect with our college students, whether they be in Knoxville, whether they be at Northeast State, wherever they may be? How can we connect with our college students so they see this, or at least help them become engaged in another community where they are? I've also been thinking about empty nesting. It's probably because my son's about to graduate and my wife and I, Cindy, are about to be empty nesters. But I think about it also from the years I was a youth minister and how so many parents will come, especially when their children are young, and they will come and they will be here and really through the teenage years. And when their children leave, all of a sudden, I think as much as some of our young professionals who've grown up here come back here and wonder, how do I fit? I think a lot of times our empty nesters look around after their children are gone and wonder, okay, how do I fit at First Baptist now that I don't have kids here? And there are other groups out there. There are those who have been divorced, who are in their mid-40s, that will walk in here on a Sunday morning and wonder, where do I fit? Where's the community for me? And I could go on and on with that list. But what we need to do is think about ethnically, socially, life stage. How can we look different? How can we be faithful to God's call and reach out to our community in the next 10 years? You know, in the book of Ephesians, Paul writes just so many good things, but in Ephesians chapter 4, and we'll only read the first part, Paul talks about what it is that binds us all together. And as much as we would like it to be this building, we love this building. We've added on to this building. We've paid off this building. This is a great building. It's a great space to invite people to. But in the end, it's not what brings us together. We have some common interests and common things, but what Paul says, the one thing that should bring us all together is this. As a prisoner for the Lord, Paul says in chapter 4, verse 1, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. I think that's so important. Paul over and over again in his writings says, bear with each other. You got to have patience with each other. You think about who Paul was writing most of the time. He was writing a Gentile church that was just newly birthed, and they were trying to merge with a Jewish church that had this long lineage of being God's people, and all of a sudden these people that they thought were outsiders, God said, no, they're equal parts of you. That was hard. That was hard to bring those two groups of people together that even Jesus in the Gospels calls someone who's a Gentile a dog at one point in time. Paul sees there's only one thing to bring those two groups together. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father over all, who is over all and through all and in all. The God who loves us, the God who saves us, and the God who guides us is the one that draws us together. And you know, I think there is not only a generation, but I think there are generations out there right now who are looking at the church. And I think they're asking these two questions. I think one of the questions they're asking is, how are you different than the social clubs that I attend on a weekly basis? How are you different than the sports teams that I am with my children? How are you different than the music groups I am with? How are you different? And the list can go on and on. How are we as a community of Jesus Christ different than all those other groups? I think they're asking that question. They're wanting to know, why should we invest our lives? Why should we invest our time into what you're doing? But I think they're also asking this: will you embrace me when I come? Will you embrace me when I come? I think we've got a lot of thinking and praying and dreaming. And I know these aren't only the three things, and I know the three things that Marvin said aren't the only things, because I know that God works through each and every one of you to guide us and to minister. But I hope you will spend time in prayer. I hope you will spend time thinking about where it is that God's Spirit is leading and guiding us as a congregation.